Good evening, everyone. I am your narrator for tonight, here to guide you into the realm of dreams with these chilling tales of the night shift. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give the video a thumbs up. I'm curious to hear where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you while watching this, so please share in the comments. When you feel prepared, find a cozy spot and take a moment to unwind. Companionship has consistently been my most valued possession. From the moment I encountered Jeremy in secondary school, our bond was immediate, and we have remained in contact ever since. He was now working as a food delivery guy, while I spent my hours in a gadget shop. Even though we didn't see each other as often as we used to, I always regarded him as one of my closest friends. When he reached out to request a favor, I found it impossible to decline. It was a Thursday evening, and I was settling in on the sofa, prepared for an intense binge-watching session when my phone buzzed. "Hey, Jeff, my friend, I could really use your assistance," just said, his voice tinged with a touch of urgency. "My bike has broken down, and I have some deliveries to complete, but I prefer if my boss didn't find out." I was already aware that his boss was a formidable character, a person who had no patience for incompetence and wouldn't think twice about letting go of anyone who fell out of favor. I understood that Jeremy truly needed that job, so I consented without a second thought. A short while later, I arrived to collect him from the corner of his house, and we began to load the pizzas into the trunk of my old car. The initial deliveries went smoothly and efficiently, setting a positive tone for the night, until we arrived at the final address. "It's a little distant, but to compensate, I'll treat you to a couple of beers afterwards," Jeremy said. We found ourselves on the fringes of the city, standing before an ancient house that seemed straight out of a horror film. It was enveloped by trees, with the sole illumination emanating from a flickering lamp on the porch. Miguel exited the car swiftly, a pizza in hand, and told me, "Wait here, I won't be long." Yet, as the moments ticked by, he remained absent. As time went by, and my friend failed to come back, a sense of worry crept in, prompting me to step out of the car in search of him. I approached the entrance and rapped on the door multiple times, yet there was no response. After numerous attempts, I finally managed to force it open and stepped inside. "Greetings?" I spoke, anticipating a response, yet all that met me was silence. The interior was even more unsettling than the exterior. The walls were adorned with strange photographs and newspaper clippings, and as I ventured deeper, a foul odor compelled me to shield my nose. I tried reaching out to Jeremy multiple times, but there was no response. Upon entering the kitchen, I noticed the pizza box sprawled on the floor, its lid ajar and a slice conspicuously absent. Instantly, I sensed that something was amiss. Then, an inexplicable sound echoed from the basement, sending my heart into a frantic race. "What's happening here?" I whispered quietly to myself, and I became aware that my friend might be in a difficult situation. Without a moment to spare, I searched for a knife in the kitchen, and upon finding it, I made my way to the basement. Yet, just as I was about to move forward, an unexpected event unfolded. A figure emerged in front of me, and without allowing me a moment to respond, he pressed a handkerchief over my face. Suddenly, all was engulfed in darkness. I found myself awakening, bound to a chair, a sharp pain piercing through my head. The light was faint, yet I instantly identified Jeremy beside me, also bound, his expression filled of dread. A towering figure loomed before us, casting an intimidating gaze that sent a chill down my spine. His mere presence instilling a deep sense of fear within me. Bound to the chair, my options were severely limited. I just stood there, frozen in place. "Welcome to my home," said the guy, his smile sending a shiver down my spine. "Today appears to be a day when I have two distinguished guests." He carried on speaking as though they were engaged in a casual coffee chat, which only intensified the oddness and dread in the air. "I imagine you might be curious about the reason for your presence here. The answer is rather straightforward. You are going to perish." The words slipped from his lips as though he were casually imparting some trivial tidbit, sending a chill through my veins. But what followed left me utterly frozen. I have a peculiar taste for the most unconventional of delicacies, and I find a certain thrill in witnessing the expressions of dread that accompany such an experience. That gaze, just before they pass, is my utmost delight. He came closer, glancing at Jeremy and then at me. "You were the original plan," he remarked, gesturing towards my friend. "No, please," Jeremy pleaded, his voice trembling as tears streamed down his face. Yet, rather than feeling disheartened, the man appeared to relish it even further. He then drew a small knife and, without a moment's pause, started to inflict wounds on Jera, slicing away pieces of flesh torn from his body. His screams echoed throughout the cellar. The sensation I experienced was beyond words. My heart raced uncontrollably, and I could nearly sense Jeremy's agonizing suffering as if it were my own. I wished to shut my eyes, yet I found myself unable to do so. The scene ensnared me, and fear rendered me immobile as the killer reveled in each agonizing second of the torment inflicted upon my friend. The tiny chamber was permeated with the scent of blood, an aroma that will forever linger in my memory, as Jeremy's anguished cries reverberated through the space. The man persisted in his gruesome task, methodically filleting him alive, until eventually the sound of his voice dwindled and his body fell limp. In that instant, a profound ache settled in my chest, the weight of the realization that my friend was truly gone. Yet, a portion of me experienced a sense of relief, too. He realized that the torment had finally come to an end. All pain and horror had vanished. However, what transpired afterward continues to linger in my dreams. The man let his knife fall, and in a shocking display of brutality, he began to consume Jeremy's flesh as I stood frozen, overwhelmed and perplexed by the horror unfolding before me. In that moment of chaos, I regretted my decision to assist my friend. I never envisioned that this would be our final evening together. Before my horrified eyes, the man was consuming Jeremy. His bites were repulsive and cacophonous, and his visage was smeared with crimson. He resembled a feral creature savoring its latest catch. However, this beast was feasting from a plate. "Assistance needed. Could someone lend me a hand, please?" I shouted with all my might, yearning for someone to hear me. Yet my cries appeared to be swallowed by the unforgiving confines of those four stark walls. I really don't have to go through with this. I consider myself a person of refinement, not a beast, so I typically prepare the meat and enjoy it with proper utensils. However, the sheer terror on your face is simply too amusing, he remarked with laughter, and each word pierced me even deeper. I found myself ensnared in a haunting dreamscape from which there seemed to be no escape. With each passing second, fear gripped me tighter, leaving me uncertain if my heart could withstand such overwhelming stress. I believed that anything, even the end of existence, would be preferable to confronting the same destiny as Jeremy. However, a surge of excitement coursed through me when I realized that the ropes binding me were somewhat slack. Oh, I realized I had an opportunity, and I understood the importance of seizing it. Thus, as the lunatic, as I savored Jeremy's flesh, I began to shift my wrist, attempting to free myself from the restraints. Yet, as I approached freedom, a growing sense of desperation enveloped me. "Your companion possesses a unique essence, driven by a desire to embrace life," remarked the man, his gaze averted from mine. "But you realize he's gone, don't you?" In that instant, seizing the opportunity presented by his distraction, I successfully liberated one of my hands. My breath came in sharp gasps, and my heart thudded loudly in my ears. Yet I refused to let this hinder my resolve. This was my sole opportunity. I noticed a metal bar lying on the floor, likely left behind by that lunatic. I took hold of it, and as quietly as possible, I rose slowly. The man was oblivious to his surroundings, entirely engrossed in his meal. With determination, I summoned my strength and attempted to strike him on the head with the bar. But he unexpectedly evaded my strike. Instead, I struck Jeremy, who abruptly opened his eyes and gazed at me with a mix of horror and confusion. I found myself completely immobilized. Jeremy remained alive. Did you really think I didn't see you getting away? I mentioned that I'm not a creature. I notice more than you might realize. Please call someone, I don't want to die. Just said in a faint voice. I attempted to strike the madman once more with the bar, but in a flash he seized it from my grasp. In a sudden moment, without a second thought, they struck me, sending me crashing to the ground. The agony was relentless, and with every strike he delivered, I found myself increasingly disoriented. I understood he was toying with my existence, and regrettably, I was faltering. Yet, just as I believed there was no escape, a sudden crash echoed behind me. It was Jeremy, my unfortunate friend, despite his severe injuries, gathered every ounce of his strength and succeeded in freeing himself, striking the lunatic with the chair. He hardly made contact, so it didn't inflict much damage, but it diverted his attention just long enough for me to dash upstairs and get away. With a pang of discomfort, I succeeded in shutting the cellar door just as the man pivoted in my direction. Upon hearing the loud banging on the door, I swiftly made my way to my car without hesitation and dialed the police. As I made my way through the living room, a muffled scream pierced the air, quickly followed by a sudden, jarring impact. My heart froze, yet I understood there was nothing within my power to change. I ignited the engine of the car as I dialed the police. I recounted the events, urging them to come as swiftly as they could, yet a part of me understood that it was already too late for Jeremy. Upon their arrival, they discovered his lifeless form, yet the perpetrator had vanished without a trace. The anguish and despair I experienced were beyond words, realizing that this creature had successfully eluded capture. He evaded capture for years, and the moment I saw the report on television, I recognized him right away. Nathaniel Bar-Jonah was his name. Alongside the murder of Jeremy, he faced accusations of multiple other homicides and acts of cannibalism. The mention of cannibalism sent a chill down my spine. The thought that my friend wasn't the only one, but merely another addition to his dreadful collection, was chilling. From that moment forward, I found a deeper appreciation for my life than I ever had before. Even for my mundane job in the technology shop, every time I spot a pizza delivery person, I find myself silently wishing for their safety, hoping they never encounter a creature like Nathaniel in their lifetime. As I settle in for the night, my thoughts drift to Jeremy, his infectious smile, the echoes of his laughter, and the fierce determination he showed in his struggle for life. To honor him is to progress, keeping in mind his desire to live fully until the very end. That is the justice I can provide him, and to know that at least that troubled man is confined now. As I perused a newspaper article one afternoon, I was unexpectedly transported back to a peculiar experience from over 20 years ago. During the latter part of 1998, there was a period when I began my role as a security guard at a block factory. My shifts were quite flexible and varied among 3 schedules: for p.m. to midnight, 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., and midnight to 8 a.m. However, the 7:30 to 3:30 a.m. slot was primarily for coverage, so there were usually 2 of us on duty during those hours. The task was a monotonous cycle of moving about, taking note of anything unusual and observing a small screen displaying the footage from the security cameras. Overall, it was largely tranquil and repetitive, yet as time passed, I managed to save enough to purchase a car. By April 1999, I made the decision to leave my job and embark on a new chapter in my life. As my departure drew near, they introduced a new individual to take my place, a gentle-spoken fellow named Chad. During his training, he dedicated time to the night shifts, immersing himself in the plant's routines and becoming acquainted with the work. Almost every night, he collaborated with another guard named Anya, who was around the same age as him. Both of them were 20. Chad, in contrast, was roughly 10 years our senior. I recall him as a serene and courteous individual, yet there was an oddity about him. I couldn't quite pinpoint it, but he seemed to be missing that certain spark that kind individuals typically possess. As we made our rounds, Chad posed questions about the work, and I couldn't help but notice his behavior was somewhat peculiar. He would chuckle at strange moments, and his tone would shift unexpectedly mid-conversation, leaving me feeling uneasy. I initially assumed he was simply a socially awkward individual who would eventually find his footing. However, one night, near the conclusion of his first week, it became clear to me that something was amiss with him. We were on a tour, and I observed that Anya came back to the office with an air of discomfort. Typically, she was quite the chatterbox. But that night I barely uttered a word, yet I sensed immediately that something was amiss. So, I waited for Chad to excuse himself to the bathroom, eager to inquire about what was happening. However, I was unprepared for the revelation he was about to share. She recounted that everything had seemed ordinary until they arrived at a section of the plant that had been shut down around 6 a.m. It was a dimly lit area known as the brass mill, devoid of employees after that hour and lacking any illumination. As they reached a landing at the top of the stairs, the atmosphere shifted dramatically for her. Anya shared that she turned around and found Chad looming just above her, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that sent a wave of fear through her, and backed away, hitting the railing at the end of the landing. In that moment, he leaned towards her and, in a flirtatious whisper, made a strange comment about her wedding ring, implying that it would end soon. His face was almost touching hers, leaving her frozen. From that moment on, I decided to take Chad with me on all my rounds. I wanted to ensure that his behavior wasn't something more serious. The night ended without further incident, and I left a note for our supervisor detailing what had happened. However, the next night, I arrived at work, and Chad was not there, so I did that shift alone while Anya stayed in the office. I sensed that something was amiss when I walked in and saw her anxiously glancing at her phone. "What's going on?" I asked her, and with wide eyes, she explained that she had discovered the reason Chad wasn't at work that night. Chad had been arrested for murdering his wife, and not only that, he had dismembered her. Her body parts had been found completely burned in a pond less than a mile from where we worked. My stomach churned at the thought. That night, the atmosphere became tense and heavy. Anya told me she had heard at the police station that Chad had been involved in the murder months before he started working with us. It truly unsettled me. From that moment on, the hours they shared were laden with tension. The thought of him having been in the presence of such a formidable creature was chilling. I began to reflect on our encounters, recalling his light-hearted laughter and those uncomfortable pauses I had dismissed as mere social clumsiness. Then, another question emerged. Had he crossed another line? And even more troubling, did he intend to cause harm to any of us? Was he observing us rather than fulfilling his responsibilities? I recall that night as I moved from one location to another, attempting to maintain my composure. However, the shadows of the plant soon started to appear more. The factory loomed ominously, its dark corridors filled with an unsettling tension. The thought of Chad possibly lurking in the shadows, poised to strike at any moment, sent a shiver down my spine, leaving me feeling exposed and vulnerable, as if danger was just around the corner, ready to pounce on either me or Anya. As the night drew to a close, I emerged from the plant with a heightened sense of unease. Memories of my time with Chad flooded my mind, each one a reminder of the things I tried to forget. I pondered what could have been done differently, if only someone had noticed the signs earlier. Years have passed, yet that dark memory clings to me, a shadow I cannot shake. I find myself glancing over my shoulder, especially at night while driving, catching fleeting glimpses of those haunting eyes in the rearview mirror. It feels as though the past lingers, refusing to fade completely. Each thought of Chad brings forth questions about the shadows in our lives that often go unnoticed, the laughter that masks the real monsters lurking in the dark. I must be candid from the outset. I'm not one of those who, when people compare themselves to others, we all carry our own histories, some of which we wish to leave behind. Yet if I am to be truly candid, my narrative is far more intricate than most. Since childhood, I have faced experiences that no one should endure. Losing my parents at a young age led me to drift from one orphanage to another, from foster home to foster home. When others hear this, they often assume I was the problem, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I simply encountered a string of unfortunate events. The reality is that wherever I went, I faced mistreatment. Eventually, I made the choice to escape and live on the streets. In that moment, I not only learned to endure, but also confronted a chilling truth. No matter how dire your circumstances, they can always spiral further into despair. I thought I had reached the lowest point, convinced that nothing could be worse. Yet, life has a way of revealing deeper abysses of suffering. One frigid night, while I was out on the streets, shivering and hungry, I encountered a man who appeared to be just a benign pizza delivery guy. Little did I know, he was Chester Turner, one of history's most notorious female killers. As the cold gnawed at my bones, I found myself in a dark corner, with nowhere to turn and hours without food, praying for the night to end. Quickly, I curled up in my old coat, trying to conserve what little warmth I had left. Suddenly, I saw a man approaching, wearing a delivery man's uniform and carrying a box in his hand. He approached with a smile that caught my attention, but I couldn't shake off my suspicion. People on the street don't usually come near with good intentions, and this time felt no different. "Hi, are you hungry?" he asked me. My stomach rumbled in response, especially when the scent of pizza wafted through the air. I hesitated for a moment, but finally took the box, feeling grateful and thinking that maybe, just maybe, it was a good day, that there were indeed charitable souls in the world. I set the pizza aside, intending to enjoy it once he left, but he lingered, that peculiar smile fixed on his face. Time seemed to freeze as we locked eyes, and a knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't merely hunger. Something felt off. "Don't worry, you can eat it. It's free," he said, his tone unsettling. I waited for him to move on, but he remained, his gaze unwavering, his insistence growing almost obsessive. "I think I will. I'll eat it later. I'm a little embarrassed," I replied, anxiety creeping in. Suddenly, his smile morphed into frustration. "Don't be ungrateful. Eat it now." His voice took on an increasingly tense edge. The sound was sharp and frantic, sending a shiver through me. Why did he care so much about the pizza? A chill coursed down my spine. Something deep inside warned me this was very wrong. I reassured myself, telling him I would eat it later, but he moved closer, gripping my arm tightly. "I told you to eat the damn pizza," he shouted, his grip tightening painfully. I felt the blood drain from my arm, fear creeping in. In a moment of instinct, I punched him in the face, catching him off guard just long enough to break free and flee without a backward glance. His footsteps echoed behind me as I sprinted, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to escape. I spotted an abandoned building and leaped inside, praying he wouldn't follow. But luck was not on my side. I could hear him approaching, his footsteps growing nearer. Faster, I moved quickly and hid in a small room, trying to control my breathing. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might come out of my mouth at any moment. The footsteps were getting closer and closer, and I knew I had to stay hidden. Carefully, I closed the door and crouched down behind an old desk, trying not to make sound. The tension in the air was palpable, but I had to keep quiet. I couldn't let him find me. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, each thud on the floor making me tremble. "I know you're here. Your feet are covered in dirt. I can see your footprints," he said. Damn it, he was right. I had left a trail as I stepped into that room, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. He was bound to discover my presence. "Why are you hiding? Weren't you hungry?" "The pizza is really good, he reassured me, and in that moment my heart froze as the door began to creak open. I stilled my breath, striving to remain silent. I sensed his gaze sweeping across the room, probing every corner. He advanced with deliberate slowness, akin to a predator on the hunt, meticulously examining his surroundings. Each corner and every step he took towards me felt like a hammer, striking my nerves. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting a soft glow that revealed just enough of him for him to know where to search for me. I shut my eyes for a moment, silently hoping that he wouldn't discover my hiding place. When his face suddenly loomed right in front of me, I let out a scream as loud as I could and attempted to flee, but he seized my arm with unexpected strength. "I told you to eat," he growled. The guy. I was thrust violently against the wall, a sharp pain shooting through my back. Yet, I refused to let him defeat me. With every ounce of strength, I struggled to break free from his hold. And in a fortunate instant, I kneed him. He was struck in the crotch and let out a scream of pain, momentarily releasing his grip on me. I seized that opportunity, and dashed up the stairs at full speed. I realized that if he caught me, I wouldn't escape that place alive. I entered a room and quickly shut the door, then searched for something to. Blocking it with an old chair, I swiftly pushed it against the door, hoping it would hold. "I've had enough of you. You won't be getting your damn pizza anymore." I heard him shout. I'm gonna make you sleep. I'll bang your head against the wall," as the guy kept shouting. I looked around. There was a window, but it was too high to reach. So I had no choice but to face the situation. In a moment of desperation, I seized an old pipe that lay on the floor and moved toward the door. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity as I listened to him pounding on the door, desperately trying to force it open. I could barely hold on any longer. Then, in an instant, the door burst open, and the chair was sent flying across the room. And a second later, he entered, his face contorted with fury. Hiding behind the door, I raised the pipe, my hands shaking with fear. I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and I lunged at him, striking his back with all my might. The guy staggered in shock, but before he could respond, I landed another blow to his head with force. In that instant, he let out a scream. In agony, he collapsed to the ground, blood seeping from his wounds. He attempted to rise and confront me, but swiftly lost his footing and fell again. I stood watching him from a distance for a couple of seconds to ensure he didn't get up, and then, without waiting any longer, I ran towards the window with my hands still. Shaking, I managed to escape and slid down the roof, searching for a way to descend. Finally, I spotted an emergency staircase and ran down it without glancing back, my heart racing wildly. Hard it hurt, but I knew I had to keep moving. When I reached the street, I kept running with no idea where I was going. I just wanted to get away from that building and that horrible man. A little further on, I found a small park and hid behind some bushes trying to catch my breath. I looked around making sure he hadn't followed me, and I stayed there so exhausted that I fell asleep. Luckily, that man never showed up. A few days later, I saw him on the television just when I had started to rebuild my life. I had got a job and was spending my days in a hotel saving up to get my own place. Then my current wife offered me the chance to move in with her. Seeing that news report caught me and took me back to that night. I survived, but I live with the remorse of what happened. I should have stayed and faced him down. How many lives I could have saved if I had. How many people could be safe if I had given him another good blow to the head instead of running away. Despite everything, I don't blame myself for what happened. No one should go through the fear I felt that night. In Los Angeles, at least, I found some peace knowing that guy wouldn't hurt anyone else. All this happened in March 2020 when the damn COVID-19 shut everything down. I was sent home from college, so I had to adapt to classes on Zoom. Meanwhile, I went back to work at the burger joint where I always worked on my breaks. I won't say the name of the place, but it was always packed. During the pandemic, things became even more chaotic because as a fast food place, we never closed, even though other restaurants around us did. Apart from the stress of the job, we had a regular customer who was very strange. We thought he had some mental problems, and he used to come several times a week. He was very strange, always talking about conspiracy theories and casting lost glances all over the place like a kind of disturbing gargoyle. The guy would turn up on his bike looking through the windows until someone took his order, but he only wanted certain people to serve him. So from time to time, he was very rude to us. He always ordered the same thing, a double cheeseburger and a side of fries more toasted than normal. Almost burnt, really, but he insisted that we serve them in a specific way. He was a true master of terror in the place. The other customers were so uncomfortable with his behavior that they preferred to wait in their cars until he left. At first, he came during the day, when we were busier, but then, because of his unpleasant attitude, my manager decided he didn't want to see him anymore, and he was sent to the night shift. I worked those nights for my classes, and I usually finished at 11 p.m. One night around 9:30, I was closing down my part of the work and starting to clean up when suddenly I saw him arriving on his bike. He was one of the few people who were still allowed to place an order because no matter how unbearable he was a regular customer. So as always, I went to serve him. The guy wanted everything fresh, the usual, but there was something new. He asked for his chips to be served with a spoon instead of tongs. Just as I was about to send him away, I told one of my colleagues, whom we could call Mark, what I wanted. Mark rolled his eyes, knowing how unbearable the guy was. So, a little resigned, he dropped some fresh chips into the fat for him. After a while, it was the manager's turn to take over. She didn't know who this regular customer was, and when serving him, she used the tongs, and in doing so, didn't cook them long enough. That is to say, they were almost burnt. Just the way this madman liked them. When he realized what had happened, there was a big fuss. He started to protest, saying that there weren't enough and that he wanted the fries more fried in his bag. I remember being so frustrated that all I wanted was for him to leave and for us to put this behind us. So, with a mixture of resignation and anger, I went back to the window. Mark joined me and said we shouldn't let that guy treat us like that. But I was tired of the situation. We've allowed this behavior for months. It's not my problem to fix the whims of a customer who has his own problems. He said quite rightly, that was life in the burger joint during the pandemic. Dealing with strangers, whims, and high levels of anxiety. I sighed at the thought of having to see him again, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of uneasy anticipation. When the night manager realized who the guy at the window was, she came over to ask what was going on. I gave her the quick story, and she decided to confront him. She approached him and told him that no matter what happened, he would always receive his order fresh, and that the best thing he could do was calm down and accept the bag she was handing him. While she was doing this, I was in the kitchen trying to finish my part of the work, hoping that would be enough to make him finally leave. But suddenly that guy, in his usual madness, put his head and one arm out of the window, trying to get the attention of my coworkers. He told them to redo his order. But both my coworker and I told him no. The food was fine, there was no reason to change anything. Apparently he didn't like that, and he got furious, and, in a fit of rage, he threw his bag of food into the restaurant, scattering the chips and the hamburger all over the floor. At that point, the manager lost her temper. She ran towards him and started shouting at him that he couldn't treat the employees like that we didn't disrespect him, and that we should put an end to the episode. But the guy wasn't having any of it. On the contrary, he shouted back at her, saying that we would never serve him again and that we should give him his money.